Green fella. Is he still behind me? You can see him, can't you? It's Alan. Hello everybody, welcome to MakersHour. We're trying a new screen layout today, see what we can do. And I'm also going to take a look at some bits and pieces to do with 3D printing a little bit later. Let's see what we can do and wait for the first questions to pop up. Interested to see if anybody actually turns up to this live stream, particularly with the new YouTube shenanigans this morning about the minimum number of followers and things that you need before you can make any kind of ad revenue from YouTube. It means that YouTube's not such an attractive thing anymore by the look of it. I think, was it 4,000 minutes and 1,000 subscribers? I've got what, 16 subscribers? It's not going to work, is it? Yeah. Alright, looks like we're underway. I'm also trying to schedule my tweets a bit today. I'm still monitoring the Twitter feed, but I also want to schedule it. So I should be able to concentrate a little bit more on what I'm doing. "3D printer isn't on today, for a change. I printed all of the hydroponics stuff. As I pointed out last week, this was the last set of pieces that I printed out. Fitted one to the hydroponics rig, but it's still not brilliant. So I think there's probably some more work required on that, really. What we'll probably do is take out the narrow trays that we had and we'll switch them over to a couple of very wide deep trays instead of the narrow little guttering trays that we're using. That way we'll be able to get more crops in less layers, because I think at the moment the layers are causing a problem for us because there's too many points of failure for water to drain between the different layers. Every time we add a layer, we add another point of failure for blockage. I think we also need to revisit the idea of using vermiculite, and you put some kind of mesh into the pots before the vermiculite and perlite to stop it from popping out. So we'll try that. Let's have a look. Very confusing because I keep seeing people saying "Hi Andy," and that's me, but it's not me. It's Chompworks, or half of Chompworks anyway, who are going to do an excellent job, I'm sure, of hosting MakersHour tonight. We've got Derek from Extreme Kits. Let's see what we've got going on there. We have, oh, very nice. So some solenoid motor kits there, that's nice. Okay, let's have a look. Hello Workstation, how are you doing? We've got, you're turning some motors for the robot chassis you got for Christmas. Ah, interesting. Pictures? Do we have pictures? Let's have a look. Again, I'm seeing myself with the lag on the screen. It's very distracting. Caffeine Jones. Weird workshop. I tried to burn a microbit in Rust and sending a laser cut component when it would have been easier to recut them. Yeah, I think we've all been at the stage of refinishing things before now. But you work with what you've got. I mean, I've done very slow work with hand tools before now when it would have taken seconds with power tool, purely because it's a little bit quieter, and maybe if you're working late at night you don't want to disturb anybody else in the area. Ah, Lorraine Underwood there saying that she just bought a laser etcher. I've been thinking about that myself. I'd be interested to see how you get on with that, Lorraine. Actually, more accurate, I've been thinking of building one myself rather than making one. Rich Rap. Ah, yes, I think we've met before, Rich Rap. There we go. Yeah, 3D printing. Yeah, not many people do ceramics and pottery these days as a hobby. I think because maybe it's quite expensive to get set up with a kit in terms of kilns and things. Although you can get kit wheels and things quite cheaply these days. Claire, you're a CAD wizard. Excellent. What do you use, I wonder? I'm a Rhino fan personally. I know it tends to be used more for jewellery design and things like that, but I just get on with the interface very well. So, yeah, I mentioned ooh, how do I kill this? Hang on. There we go. I mentioned earlier on that I've been thinking of doing some 3D printer type things, and this fan is the first part. I ordered it a couple of weeks ago, and it's popped in from China. So it took a slow route to get to me. But it's a 24-volt fan, and since it was something ridiculous like £1 or something like that, I haven't actually wired this up yet to try the fan to see how noisy it is. But I'm replacing a 40mm fan on one of the old the CTCs, the ones that are a standard MakerBot one clone. They're not bad when you get them set up well, but they're from the factory. They need a bit of work doing and a few extra pieces printing. It's not a big deal, but if you want something working straight out of the box, you're probably best going for a different brand. But if you happen to tinker, they're well worth it for the price. The downside to them is that, well, one thing is they run off 24 volt all the time, which is quite unusual. And since most of the things that I have based around 5, 12 or 3.3 volt, 24 volts a bit awkward. I don't tend to think. I mean, if this fan was 12 volt, I've probably got 10 of them stashed away somewhere, of all different flavors with different blinky lights and you know, different volumes and things like that. But because it's 24 volt, I had to send away for one. But the downside to this printer is that they've used 24 volt and they've used the cheapest of the cheap, as you would expect for a budget printer, and all of the fans are very noisy. You know, and all of the wires are the minimum you can get away with. The junctions are the least that you can get away with, and you have to do some sort of scaffolding and supporting to protect the wires and replace the fans in this case, because the 40mm fan is just so noisy when it kicks in that it drowns out whatever you're doing. Whereas I've heard good things about people switching out with a 120mm fan with some slightly longer feet on the base of the printer. So that's what I'll be doing, I think. I might try and wire this up in a little bit and see how much noise we get. I'm sure it will be quieter than the original. The one thing that does worry me is that it comes with this connector on, despite being advertised as a 24 volt fan. That is a 12 volt connector. That's a standard ATX style connector for a 5 1/4 inch floppy. Sorry, 5 1/4 inch a DVD bay, essentially, on a machine. I'm showing my age there. 5 1/4 inch floppies. So 5.5, 3.5, 5 1/4, 3.5. That was it, wasn't it? Yeah. So 5 1/4 inch floppy. They had this kind of connector on the back. That to me says that this is actually a 12 volt fan, not a 24 volt. Or if it does run at 24 volt, it's going to fail after a while. It's not the end of the world. I can stick a voltage regulator in there and drop the fan speed down to 12 volt. It's not a big problem. I just hope that buying this I would be able to directly plug into 24 volt. Or maybe it is 24 volt and they've just used it on 12 because it's a quieter fan when it's running at a slower speed. So, oh yeah, we did make some things as question one was going. You know, what did we make? I don't know if I can get this to work. I made that's a tabletop for potting things in a shed. So for potting up plants and greenhouse, it's mesh so that the soil will fall through. It'll just sit on a couple of trestles, you know, saw trestles, saw horses, and it will make it easier for me to pot things out and to store things out of the way. We also made some chutney, which you can see on Shedlandia.com. The recipe for that will be coming up, I think, on Saturday or Friday. Friday, I think it'll be up. Friday afternoon. And I also made a cake as well, which it's a make. You know, it's a cake. What more do you want? It's cake. You can eat it, and I made it, so it's a make. Let's see what else we have. What do people think of this this screen layout I'm using? I'm using Hootsuite. I'm using the live feed from Hootsuite to just drop this into the left hand side of the screen. There's a lot of talk about doing things automatically this week, I think, on Makers Hour. People saying no, they can't be there, but they want to schedule the tweets to come up. I mean, I'm running scheduled tweets at the moment, but I'm actually here. So, hello. And it just makes it a little bit easier for me to talk to the camera and to try and keep an eye on what's going on without having to type in my answers to questions which I already know. So I've scheduled them to pop up at approximately the right time, I think. The other thing is I don't trust the automatic tweets. Okay. Oh yeah, some responses about using Rhino. I do love Rhino, and if you are an academic, then you can get a very good deal on the on Rhino software. The discount is astonishing, and there are no limitations on it. I don't think, being an educational version. I'm receiving interactions from everywhere at the moment. Okay, let's see what's going on. I always forget to turn one thing off when I'm doing this. It's usually either the Amazon Alexa and somebody tries to drop in on me on Alexa while I'm talking live on the internet on YouTube, but also it's my phone. This time I've left it on vibrate instead of silent, so I'm picking up vibrations. I don't know if you can hear them on the microphone, but every time MakersHour updates, I'm getting vibrations on the phone. Yeah, the command line in Rhino is very useful. Guild of Makers there. It's also really good for exporting things, and I find it's very good to export things for laying out on a 3D bed. Oh, good. My second question is in fact up, which is what I was trying to check at the moment. I just don't trust automatic notifications off the top of my head. I'm using TweetDeck to schedule these tweets. What else we got? Lisa Milne saying, machining a shaft on a lathe when things went badly resulted in stripping the lathe down, finding a previously unspotted production fault, and fixing it. The lathe worked much better since. Yeah, I've had that happen. Was it by any chance one of the 14 by 12? Sorry, not 14 by 12. The 4-inch import lathe that you get. That's what's it? It's one of the Axminster ones, and also the Clark and a couple of other brands. All use the same basic casting, and then drop some of their own electronics in. I had the same problem. The casting isn't brilliant, and also the motors on the Clarks. I think I had the CL300M, which is quite a small little bench lathe, just 12 or 14, I think, inch lathe. But I mean, it was ideal for what I wanted, and I could move the thing about, which was important. So we could regain desk space if I needed it. But for one thing, the motors were very fussy in there, and the motors could burn out. I had to replace a motor in there, and I mean, I wasn't taking too much off or anything like that, really. I wasn't stressing the lathe. I was using basic mild steel, and I was taking off. It was only a couple of thou or something. It just decided it's time to go. It was really a finishing pass almost. It was just a sort of a spring pass almost. But I also had some trouble with the. I think it used Triax in there, did they? And that they blew. I had to replace those on the board and the speed controller. So the electrics in that were quite annoying. And of course, it did the horrifically scary thing of when they blew, it defaulted to full power mode rather than just being off, which is much safer and much more pleasant. So all of a sudden, my workpiece just accelerated to to the full RPM of the lathe, and it just wasn't something that was stable enough to be spinning at that speed. So I had to hit the stop button pretty quickly. What else have we got? Yeah, and I also found that the lathe worked better after I'd taken it apart and put it back together again. It's something I should have done when I bought it, because I bought it second hand. But it was working okay for what I needed. And it's one of those where you just get used to the backlash and you just get a feel for the lathe. You see, funny enough, you see a lot of engineers these days, they learn too much to rely on the digital readout on the machine and trust that the backlash and things won't be there. And yet you'll see a lot of older machinists who've worked on lathes for a long time. They'll pretty much ignore the DRO in some cases and just rely on caliper gauges and on micrometers, which is a far more sensible route as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the DRO doesn't take account of the things like the tool you're using is going to blunt as you're using it, so you're going to get some inaccuracy there and some other bits and pieces like that. And there will always be backlash. It doesn't matter how good your lathe is, how new it is, there is always going to be some backlash, and you need to take that out before you start cutting. You have to roll the pass back and come back in again, so that you're on a good thread rather than being on floating on air that's going to start moving when you move into the face. It's also the only time I ever broke a mobile phone as well, was 2 weeks after my contract ended with a mobile phone. It was a Galaxy S2, so it gives you some idea of when it was, but I'd owned the thing for about 18 months. The warranty ended on it, the contract ended on it, I switched to pay-as-you-go, and then of course I'd got no insurance because I'd switched to pay-as-I-go, and about probably less than a week, I think it was, that I did it, I dropped the phone into a moving lathe, and it did not go well. I had to replace some parts of the phone, some parts being the battery, the screen, the outer bezel, the microphone, and I think the camera was okay, but I had to replace the glass on the back of the camera. I basically trashed the entire phone. Luckily, I had a friend who'd got an identical phone, but his had blown the motherboard, but everything else was okay. So in the end, I just swapped the motherboard, I think, and it was working again afterwards. Oh yeah, the favourite thing. I mean, I've posted online before, I think, about the bandsaw that I used. In fact, if I switch, you can see that the bandsaw over my shoulder now. This bandsaw is not the same bandsaw that was there a few weeks ago. The reason for that is the other bandsaw finally gave up the ghost and died. And I would like to get it working again at some point, but I needed a bandsaw quite urgently. I needed one that didn't keep throwing the belt every few minutes, and it wasn't running off a belt drive that had me worried that something was going to drop into the back pulleys and cause problems that way. Sort of fire a screwdriver off across the workshop or something off a belt drive. So it just made sense to switch over to that second-hand Clark. It cost me less than the parts to repair the wheel would do for the old bandsaw that I had, and that was gifted to me by another maker, a great guy named John. He's an engineer, and he had a beautiful setup at his house, but there was just too much kit in it, and this was handed down to him by a friend who had subsequently died and left him this handmade bandsaw. So I do want to get the thing working again because it's sort of sentimental value, but um, you know, I can make it into something a little bit more useful than it was in the past. And I have bought some parts for it. I've got this, which is a 24-volt scooter motor. You know, one of these kids scooters, or I won't say a wheelchair because wheelchair motors are different. They have an inbuilt braking system for when the power fails, but you know, it's designed to move a person at a reasonable rate. So I'm going to try and wire that into the old bandsaw's drive socket instead of having the pulley coming off with a great big quarter horsepower grinder motor that was recycled, because it's completely unnecessary. It's far too powerful for what's in there, and it would be nice to be able to have a, you know, a 24-volt bandsaw that I could just take portably around somewhere if I needed to. You know, things like EMF camp and various festivals. You haven't always got mains electricity, but if you've got tools that you can use that are running off battery, that's always useful. And if you get a power fail as well. In fact, if I shuffle across this drill here, this small drill, I converted that from 240 volts when I bought it, so that's actually a 12-volt drill now. And I've just bought, in fact, because I want to run it off a computer power supply. And as great as computer power supplies are, they can, when you start dragging a heavy load all at once, you can just knock the power supply out. There's usually protection in there that kicks the power supply off if it detects a heavy load because it thinks there's a short. So I've just bought a fairly hefty cap, 3.3 farad, 25 volt. So that should sit on here, you know, on the drill somewhere, and give me a little bit more leeway when it starts to draw a lot of power. So you know, it can take it smoothly from the power supply rather than just try and pull a chunk all at once, which will knock the power out. I think I mentioned before about converting the power supplies from PCs. They have massively powerful 12-volt lines. You can get 30 or more amps out of a standard desktop computer power supply. And if you fiddle around with the bridge rectifier, there's usually a kind of a current sense in there that keeps the voltage accurate, and it does that with a very sort of a basic potential divider usually. And if you fiddle about with the potential divider sufficiently, you can play around with the voltage a little bit, so you can get your 5-volt can go to 6-volt if you prefer, or you can usually take the 12-volt up to about 14 or 15 volts. It depends on what capacitors they're fitted in. If they've fitted a sort of a 16-volt cap in, then you're going to be limited by the power of the capacitor there. But if they've, you know, if they've just done a standard thing and stuck a 24-volt in or 25-volt in, then you can, in theory, just ramp the other resistor around a little bit and alter the output. In fact, the shed lights at the moment are running off a battery, but I'm also charging the battery using a modified PC power supply, which is dumping out 14.2 volts. So that way it won't drain the lights while I'm talking on here now. So where are we? We're on question 3 now, are we? We're still on question 3, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to see if I can upgrade this 3D printer a little bit more. In fact, I need to do some more work other than replace this fan, because it's a dual head extruder, and it's based on the replicator the replicator with the dual extruder. But one of the drive gears on the stepper motor is slipping on the shaft. So I need to get in there and disassemble the printer head and put it back together again, and probably change out some of the little grub screws that are in there. I think they're just using ordinary steel grub screws at the moment, and they're stripping quite badly, so I need to replace those, I think, with probably some stainless ones that are a little bit more sturdy, and so that it won't slip on the shaft. I had the same problem on the other feed about 12 months ago, but I very seldom use the left-hand extruder, because I generally just print on single material, and I don't need to do things like dissolving supports or multi-material prints. But I would like to get it working so I can do that, so I can experiment with doing some sort of multi-material flexible rigid stuff, you know, so, sort of book fold plastic sheets and things like that, so that would be quite interesting. I think we might be going on to question 4 now. Oh yeah, it's about the soundtrack, isn't it? Generally when I'm in the shed, I have Alexa. What time is it, Alexa? Interesting.
Sorry, what was that?
What time is it?
It's 8:31 p.m.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that the Amazon dot is in here and responds, so I still keep using the name, and I end up in these silly little nonsensical conversations trying to get the thing to be quiet. But I have the Amazon dot in here, and that's linked up to my Audible, and also to my music collection. I very seldom listen to music while I'm working. For one thing, I am sufficiently paranoid to worry that I won't hear something important happening if I've got music playing. Sometimes that is the whistle on capacitors or something as they're about to blow, or a power supply that's starting to spark. And also you can hear things like belts slipping on, say for the pillar drill, for example. And things like my phone, I like to be able to hear my phone if that goes off in an emergency. So I don't generally listen to anything other than maybe an audiobook. Occasionally I will, if I'm doing something that doesn't require concentration, into well, not concentration but focus, so to be safe, then I will listen to sort of anything really. I think everybody's got a huge eclectic collection now that I don't think there's any one style though. I mean, sometimes I'll listen to classical, sometimes I'll listen to well, I was listening to the genetic opera the other day, and then I was listening to the Flying Dutchman, and then I listened to the Pirates of Penzance. So it varies. But if it's anything that's going to interfere with what I'm doing, I certainly won't listen. And also, I think that a lot of music deserves to be listened to properly. So I don't like being distracted away from, you know, missing something that's quite pleasant just because I'm doing something else. I think there's a lot to be said for doing one thing at a time and trying to do that well. Yeah, lots of people are saying eclectic there. Yeah, you see, where are we there? Tim Wappert. Late night dance music from the radio stream keeps the pace up while I'm working on projects in the early hours of the night, and not too distracting when trying to concentrate. Yeah, I would still worry that I would be distracted by by having the sound on. And I'm guessing that if it's that late at night, unless you're living in the middle of nowhere, you're probably listening with headphones on. And again, that's something that I'll be worried about, would be having having my ears plugged while something's going on around me. Yeah, see, Lisa Milne's saying the same there. That you'd like to be able to hear the machine that you're working with, and I agree with that. And I also think that headphones can be, it can get in the way a little bit sometimes as well. I mean, I know you can chuck them out of the way, but it only takes a dangling wire in the wrong place. And if you don't need that wire there, remove it. It's the same as anything else. If you don't need to be wearing a necklace, remove it. If you don't need your hair down, tie it back. It's that kind of, just do your best to keep things as safe as you can. Oh, the other thing that came in the post this week is another one of these, which is the, oops, let's see if I can bring that up a little better so you can see it. Go. Get it an angle, there we go. That is 100 litre per minute pump that runs off 12 volt. It's absolutely brilliant. It says nominal 9 to 14 volt, but I've actually run this down to 2 volt and it still flows properly. The only thing that it doesn't do at 2 volt is it doesn't prime very well. So I'm considering doing some kind of variation where I can get the prime to ramp up and then come back down again. I'll probably do that with an Arduino, if truth be told. I've got this idea that I might want to control the hydroponics with an Arduino Wi-Fi of some kind. Probably one of these, the 8266 type affair. It's just a bog standard Arduino really that I can plug anything into, and then I can set up a website to control the hydroponics and do the settings on the hydroponics that way. I think that would be quite neat and quite a nice way to set things up, that doesn't require having a big liquid crystal display and things like that, or a big monitor connected to it to start pressing buttons to set timers and things and activate and deactivate things. It'd be nice if I could just do the whole thing from the phone using just a RESTful API, so the same as most searches work now. Is January really a quiet month for makers? I've got to say I'm not sure. I mean, we've done a lot this month, and we're getting ready for doing things in the garden. So the end of this month, I think, we'll be starting to get ready to plant things out. So into the hydroponics, I mean, not into the garden, obviously, at the end of January. We'll be putting some seeds in at the end of this month, and it'll start to be getting busy. And it's quite busy now, just figuring out what's got to go where from that perspective. There really is no single taste in music, is there, looking through the list of all different things? What else do we have? Yeah, no dips in the sound that let noises through. You see, that worries me. That's Diana Prop. Just anything I have heard enough that is not a distraction, with no dips in the sound that let noises through. I understand wanting to block the noises out if you're working with loud tools, but then you're not really blocking them out, you're just replacing it with another loud noise. If you're just doing something like design or sketching, then fine, but if it was any kind of tools, then I'd really would worry about using headphones at the time. Yeah, it's Rich Rap 3D. I usually have a podcast on if I'm making things by hand. Much more interested in the radio, but designing with computers, garbage, prodigy. But yeah, that's about the same as I would pick actually, probably. Yeah, as I say, but podcasts is another thing. Actually, I didn't mention podcasts. I do listen to several podcasts, and I will listen to. I'll just put YouTube on and just listen to it. In fact, occasionally I've put um, things like the what you call it, the MIT lectures on in the background. If I'm not doing something that's particularly focus oriented, and I can concentrate more on the words than I can on what I'm doing. So if I was just sorting resistors or doing a little bit of disconnected soldering, then you don't need too much safety protection equipment or anything for that. So I could probably cope with that. Mm. Ah, yes, switches and connectors, Thornhill. Yeah, I went through a phase many years ago of just collecting switches from everything. Anything that was being thrown away, I would take the switches out and the connectors out. I still have quite a lot left now. A lot of them now are micro switches, but at the time it was a lot of the equipment was sort of the old tail end of the late 80s stuff that was starting to break down. So you got some great kind of toggle switches and things like that, and uh, they're still working fine. They're a lot more sturdy than some of the new switches with the plastic cases that you buy. I dread to think at the cost of some of these switches that probably went into landfill in a lot of cases. But as I say, I really struggled with this question. I sat and thought about this question for quite a long time, and I just couldn't come up with one thing. Part of me wanted to say 3D printer, but at the same time, it's the 3D printer isn't really special to me, if that makes sense. I've made 3D printers and things like that and used them, but there's nothing that's particularly special about it. And I enjoy using them, but I don't enjoy using them more than I enjoy the whole process of making. The the process of making itself is what's interesting for me, and it's the different ideas and the different thoughts that the different solutions that you come up with to solve problems. I mean, I've done some really bizarre fixes before now, but if you ask me why I just disassembled the toaster and plugged it into a radio, um, I'd point out that we were now in fact receiving Radio 4 when we weren't before. It's not conventional to do that, but it worked. It extended the ground plane and worked properly. So, a bit weird, but it worked. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy doing electronics. I like the electronics part of a project, and I like the electronics part of a project if it works properly. But I enjoy things like the Arduino now. I like the comfort of being able to do that without having to bolt together 25 different sort of opto-isolators and, well, opto-isolators, but sort of gates and 7.4 series ICs and 4300 HCs, or just all of those different circuits you just have to bolt together to essentially build a function that we can now do very easily with a microcontroller. I do enjoy that. Particularly when things don't work, it's a lot easier to fault find in code than it is to figure out which track you've just soldered together that you shouldn't have done. Yeah. Oscilloscope. I do like oscilloscopes. Tim Wappett again saying there, I do like oscilloscopes, but I very seldom use them. And to be honest, most recently, I've just built up a basic sort of audio amp out of parts off the bench now and again. Plugged a speaker into. In fact, I don't know where I've put this, but I made essentially a small audio tweeter that made a sonic, a sonic response to the signal it was receiving. So you can broadly speaking hear the difference between sawtooth and square tooth, and and sine wave and things like that. You can hear those differences, and you get a feel for what data should sound like when it's transferring at certain rates. So when it sounds different to that, you know something's not quite right. In the same way that the ham experts and things will spot slow scan radio just by ear, and they will spot different frequency ranges. You can do that when you're testing a circuit out, and so I don't often use an oscilloscope. I'll just use a cheap audio amp that's knocking about, because it's quick, and you don't. A lot of times when you're working with an oscilloscope, I find you're not actually looking for an accurate trace from the oscilloscope. You're looking for something that's wrong, and you can hear something that's wrong usually. You will hear if you're getting a very high-pitched tone when you should be getting, something that's about 9,600 chords. You'll spot if you've got 11,500 or 115,000, and you'll also spot other things, like the signal clipping out. You'll spot, or other things like that. So you don't actually need the trace to do that. There are times when you do want the trace, when you want to know exactly what your trace voltages are and things like that, your extents and things. But yeah, there's a real mixed bag of answers from people on these. We've got Miles still on the lathe. We've got Sculpey. Sculpey is actually quite handy stuff to have around. The only thing I find that is, after a while, it just goes off. It's got a shelf life. So I used to keep plastiline around for doing the same sort of jobs as Sculpey, because I tend to use it to just build temporary barriers for things, or jigs to hold things, or that kind of thing. Something that needs to be resilient but not permanent. I'm aware it's usually for sculpting, but as is plastiline. But I used to find plastiline was quite handy, even though it was softer. It wouldn't dry out so quickly as plasticine would, which made it less useful when it dried out. But it could also hold quite a nice shape, particularly if it was cold. There we do. Well, we've only got 10 minutes left. Well, 12 minutes left, so we've not got long left. We're getting through. And I'm hoping I'm still streaming. Yeah, I feel slightly dishonest about scheduling these tweets, but it's very complicated trying to trying to keep attention on multiple places at once. So it's a lot easier to just talk to the camera without having to worry about writing and reading. Yeah, machining bronze workshop shed. Machining bronze is wonderful, yeah. There are certain materials that do turn very nicely. Delrin's another one that I quite like. Peak I don't like working with, because for obvious reasons. Peak plastic is a very good thermal insulator, and that means, for one thing, it's also very rigid, and it's great for making parts of hot ends for 3D printers and things like that. It's got a very high melting point, it's very stable. But because it's a good insulator, um, it means it's absolutely awful to work with on a lathe. It will heat up very quickly, it will chip, it will bend. It's not a pleasant thing to work with at all. Um, you can drill it pretty much, and you can cut it, but even cutting it, you need to keep your speeds low, because it just eats through materials if you let it. It will get things far too hot, and a lot of people don't realize that when you start getting tools too hot by drilling too fast or cutting too fast, it's not just that it blunts the blade, it's the thermal shock to the metal causes it to become much more brittle. It essentially tempers the metal. It hardens the metal, and next time you come to use that drill, or next time you come to use that saw, you may well find that the blade just shatters, which has happened before. I've had that happen before on jigsaw blades, and also on drills. And there are a few things as frustrating as a drill that's just shattered in the workpiece, because you've then got a piece of hardened metal stuck into something that you need to try and remove without destroying it. It's near impossible. Hmm. Yeah. Did I answer the question about the mistakes I made? Sure I did. I was talking about... I can't see it now. Aha, yes I can, hang on. Yeah, the second question about the mistakes that I've made. This is it. Uh, it's a bearing for the tiller of a boat, and I designed it, I printed it, I made it, I realised I'd been a complete idiot, and then I just packed some felt around the inside of the tiller and solved the problem. So, you know, if I just thought about the problem a little bit more, rather than going to immediately to the 3D printing route and thinking that, you know, when you've got a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, and when you've got a 3D printer, everything looks like you can solve it with a 3D printer. And it would have worked. I could have fitted it. It would have worked, but it was a stupid thing to do. And I keep that in the workshop now, because it reminds me not to do that. It reminds me to try and find the simple solution, you know, the simple answer. Yeah, I do like Dr. Footlegger. I listen to the kids arguing as I've left them alone. Yeah, I must admit I do like conversation while I'm working. I do enjoy doing things and talking to people, unless it's something I really need to concentrate on, like you're trying to work out some complicated gearing or something like that. Um, Jobs generally go faster if there's two of you, even if one of you is just talking or passing a tool or something like that. So, you know, listening to people talk is quite relaxing, I think, while I'm working. Again, as long as it's not a distraction. But it's also another safety thing, in that, you know, don't do anything with dangerous tools while you're on your own. It's a standard sort of thing that people tend to forget these days, I think. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in the rule zero of hack spaces, and do not be on fire. That is a valuable thing not to be. I was saying earlier about laser engravers and laser cutters. I'm thinking of making one. I'm just trying to decide the best materials to use. Part of me wants to use stainless steel bar, but part of me wants to use aluminium extrusion. I think the extrusion might win because it's going to be cheaper, and it'll also be lighter than stainless steel bar. Ideally, I'd want to use something that I can put into these ceiling beams when it's not being used. So I can just pick, I can just kind of pick the edge of it and pull it up out of the way into the roof space when it's not being used. Should be an interesting job. I've got an old RepRap printer that's currently sitting at work, and the next time I'm up there, I think I'm going to bring that back down with me, and I'll probably disassemble it to get the parts so that I can make a laser cutter. Obviously, there's issues to do with just to do with fume extraction and laser safety and things like that. But I think I should be able to work those out into something that I can, push up into the ceiling out of the way. Yeah, workstation. Never underestimate Lego. That's very true. It's great for making prototypes of things, and it's also great for making walls around things when you want to make a mold. So if you start out with a Lego base and build Lego walls around it to build a box around your mold, you can make a two-part mold with supports quite nicely. And you can also rig it with the Lego so that you can use the Lego as a locking point, so you can interlock the parts together quite neatly when they're, the two halves of the mold when they're put back together. That's quite an interesting use for Lego. Oh, nice, a Raspberry powered hologram machine. That's a Raspberry Pi powered hologram machine. Oh, that's nice, yeah. Well, it looks like we're coming up to the end there, so we've got the last questions out. I think we've answered the last question. What was the last question? Did we have a last question? I've forgotten the last question. Oh yes, I'd have to say it was a question of the thing I'm most proud of making. I think it wasn't the cake actually, or that. I think it was probably either the boat that I fitted out, which I'm currently writing a series on about living aboard on Shedlandia.com. So it was probably either that, which was in a terrible state when I got there, and then I converted into something quite comfortable, and it was a nice place to live on there. Yeah, there we go. That's Copperfield. That's where I used to live. And the other thing I'm torn between is Shedlandia. The shed we built last year. I'm quite proud of that. I think it's something I use very often. I mean, I'm sitting in it now and using it. So that's quite it's quite a satisfying feeling to to be in something like that. And we're down to the last few seconds of Makers Hour again. Thanks for tuning in, those of you who tuned in. I don't think I'm going to do this next week. I may, but I'm going to have to look into what's going on with the YouTube the YouTube advertising changes and things. I need to figure out what they're actually going to do, because I'm not sure if I can sustain this kind of thing if there's not any hope that I will ever make any money from the channel. I mean, I'm not doing this for money, but this is something that eats up a couple of hours of time. And there we go, Guild Makers. That's it for tonight. Many thanks from Andy and Kate here at Chompworks to all relying at MakersHour tonight. Let's hope it's been fun for you all. Big thanks to the team at Guild Makers for the opportunity to host this week. And thank you guys for hosting. That was great. So that was Andy and Kate. I'm going to end the stream there because I'm not making anything at the moment other than people's heads hurt by me talking. So I'm going to say good night, folks. It's been fun, and we'll see you next time, which may be next week, maybe not. I'm not sure.